If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People who've experienced or seen portals in the woods, fairies, fairy realms, missing 411 incidents, weird glitches deep in the woods, lost time, and other scary unresolved phenomena, please share your stories. When I was younger, a friend and I were walking through a forest in the winter. Everything was covered in snow, and the lake was frozen solid. Randomly in the middle of the forest, there was a clearing, the sun was shining through, there was no snow, the grass was vibrant, and when we stepped in there, it was warm enough to take our coats off. We stayed there and played for hours. We wanted to bring proof of what we saw, so we each grabbed a handful of the grass, and we ran home. We'd only been gone an hour. When we reached into our pockets for the grass, it was gone. We tried to take my parents to the spot, but it was gone. We never saw it again. But honestly, it was magical. I hope one day I'm lucky enough to find myself there again. Around 6 years ago, me and a friend were driving on this road called Sweet Hollow Road, which is said to be haunted. We decided to park the car and walk down this road perpendicular to the Sweet Hollow that was blocked off. A little ways down, a parking lot branched off to the right, and there stood an old, what looked like abandoned church. It was surrounded by woods and tall grass, and the blacktop had cracks in it. We walked up to the church to look in the window because we noticed a light was on. There was nothing in the room except a wooden chair right in the center. It was honestly like something from a horror movie. We ended up getting creeped out and leaving. The next day, we were hanging out again, and this time my friend's sister was with us. We were bored just driving around, so we decided to show her the creepy church. We parked on the side and walked to the church. As soon as we saw it, we flipped out. The church was gone. The parking lot was still there, but the whole building was completely gone. There was decently tall grass where it was the night before, which couldn't grow that quickly. I guess it is possible that the building was demolished, but it's pretty far-fetched. Has this ever happened to anyone else? In 1868, a 3-year-old girl disappeared from her father's lumber camp in northern Michigan. After enlisting the help of a pair of professional hunters who happened on the hysterical search scene by chance, the men traced the little girl's feeble cries to a dense stand of brush. When the men advanced on the thicket, they saw what they said looked like a giant bear burst from it and run across the river, heading for the distant horizon. The men recovered the girl unharmed from the brush. She later told them that Mr. Wolf would not let her leave and had eaten her hat right off her head, although he had also gathered berries and fed them to her. 28 to 1642 On the night of July 2, 1955, Mrs. Curtis, summoned by her distraught older children, arrived just in time to see what she and the children said was a huge bear cradling her 2-year-old daughter Ida Mae Curtis in its front paw as it scurried off on 3 legs from their tent in a lumber camp at the Wild Kootenai National Forest in Montana. 29. On July 4, after a search by 350 backwoodsmen in heavy rain, Ida was found dry and safe in a crudely built shelter across a river, just 300 yards away from where she was taken. Ida would later relate, to the best of a 2-year-old's ability, being cuddled and comforted by the bear during the time she was missing. The sheriff became so angry that he actually paid the Curtises 3 separate visits, demanding that they stop telling their story of a bear abducting and caring for their little girl. He told them, "Quit telling that story. It could never happen. It didn't happen, and don't say it anymore." I was driving to a friend's house around 9 p.m. tonight. It's only about a 10-minute drive, but I noticed something weird after about a minute of driving. There were no street lights on that portion of the street. I thought they must have just been turned off or something, but these 5 or so street lights on that portion are a fairly new addition to the road. My car has a squeaking noise that I'm trying to find and can't figure out, and I noticed that the sound wasn't happening anymore. I was also thinking about how quiet it was sounding, and I realized my tires were not making any noise. My window was down. I have mud tires as of last summer that make a distinct rumbling or whistling sound while driving, but the tires I had before these made no noise. At this point, I thought that something strange was going on, and when I pulled up to the next stoplight, I looked at the funeral home across the street and noticed that they had all the flowering bushes in front of the building rather than the newly made parking spots. This light also just didn't change from red to green for about 3 minutes, and with no other cars around this whole time, I just drove through the intersection because I thought it wouldn't be changing anytime soon. These changes I noticed are indicative of what my drive to my friend's house would have been about 3 to 5 years ago. Is it possible that I shifted back in time by 3 to 5 years just during this drive? Or maybe an alternate reality? Once I got to his house, everything was normal, and I told him about the events. Driving back home, everything was back to how it normally is. My mom and I went camping in the woods of northern Wisconsin. When we arrived at the campground, we were the only people there. Which was weird by itself, sure. Everything went semi-normal until our tent filled to the brim with spiders, and we ended up sleeping in the car. It was about 2 to 3 a.m., and I was wide awake because I was just restless and almost paranoid that someone was out there in the woods. I was looking out the left rear window when I saw a large portal open. I couldn't believe my eyes, so I pinched and slapped myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I definitely wasn't. I could feel the pain. As I watched, the portal got larger and wider, about 7 to 8 tall. It was bluish green, almost like Rick and Morty, ironically. Immediately after this, I woke up my mom to see if she could see what I was seeing too. She did, freaked out a bit, and said, "Don't move and be quiet." I saw one humanoid figure come out with a lantern. He looked around and then gestured for the others to come out. I would say 5 to 6 people came out, almost in Amish Mennonite sort of clothing. They all had lanterns as well. They gathered around each other and seemed to talk, then one by one they all entered the woods in a single file line. The first man to walk out of the portal was the one to go back into the portal. After he got in, the portal closed, and we watched the humanoids walk into the woods until we couldn't see their light anymore. My mom immediately started the car, and we left in complete silence for the entire car ride back home to Illinois. Ever since then, both my mom and I have been avid believers in the paranormal and aliens. I'm wondering if anyone has ever seen anything like this before or experienced it before, because I know this sounds absolutely insane, but I swear it happened. I wanted to share my experience with a fairy when I was a child. I'm currently 19, and all my life, I've been obsessed with fairies. As a kid, I read books about them, researched them, and left offerings out to them in my backyard. And one time I saw one with no doubt. I was about 9 to 10 years old, and I was at my cottage. This cottage is about 3 hours north of Toronto. The cottage has a huge forest in its backyard, and I was alone, waiting at the top of the stairs leading into the forest. Suddenly, a tiny creature flew up to my face. I can't fully picture it, but I know it was mainly brown with long limbs and wings. It had a human-like face, and it made a motion with its hand, saying "come here" or "follow me," and then it flew off towards the front of my cottage. I've had other smaller supernatural experiences at this cottage, but this one changed my life. Or solidified my belief in fairies, and even now, almost 10 years later, I still doubt it. Let me know if you guys have any other similar experiences. Almost, maybe. When I was about 8 years old, my parents divorced. The day we were packing up the house to move across the country, I found my sister outside in the backyard, staring into the woods. We had train tracks basically right in our backyard with some wood just behind it. Incidentally, a man had committed suicide on those tracks right behind our house a few years prior. Anyway, this was 30 or so years ago, so the details are a bit hazy. I remember my sister saying that there was a strange opening in the woods, and she said it felt like it was calling for her to enter. I thought she was just pulling a prank like always, but she seemed sincere. Then I looked where she was looking, and I could see it too. In one section of the woods, the trees made an archway, and I remember it having a hazy glow about it. Nothing was really noticeable, it just seemed different somehow. Instead of just regular shadow, it seemed almost purple, I guess. We both just kind of stared with wonder for a while before we got called inside to do something. Later in the day, I went back outside and tried as I might, but I never could find that exact spot again. Everything just looked like regular wood. So I was talking to my ex-husband the other day, and we got on the subject of one of our vacations. We never really took actual vacations. The two major ones were picking our son up from boot camp and 8. The last one we took ended rather strangely, and I thought I would see what you all thought. We had to go to Missouri to pick up our son from 8 and print out the directions from MapQuest. Yes, it was a minute ago, probably 2006 to 2007. We did the same when we went to Oklahoma, no big deal and no issues. The trip down to Missouri was normal, nothing strange at all. I got there around 8 p.m., settled in, and slept. The next day, we took a pretty rushed look around the base, walked through the museum there, and decided to leave around 2 in the afternoon. As we had done before, we decided to just use the directions we already had, just in reverse. The first few hours of the trip were normal, nothing strange at all. However, once we crossed into Iowa and it started getting dark, well, things got strange. The first odd thing was that I got violently car sick. We had to stop every 20 to 30 minutes and wait a few minutes for my queasiness to pass. I have never been car sick, not before then or since. But that wasn't the weirdest part. As I said, we just used the same directions in reverse to get back. But once we hit Iowa, the roads. I don't know how to explain it best. We followed the directions exactly, there were no variations because we didn't have GPS, hell, we barely had cell phones. That's important to remember. We would see a sign for a town with an arrow, the one's Iowa town, greater than 13 miles and drive for an hour and come across the same sign for the same town. I know it isn't very impressive in writing, there are lots of explanations. But it kept happening. We would see the same town sign 2 to 3 times, and we absolutely should not have. The oddest thing is that it took us about 10 hours, no joke, to get through Iowa. It didn't take us that long on the way down. The whole trip down was maybe 10 to 11 hours, and it took that long to get through just Iowa. And my being sick is not what caused the time delay. We stopped often, yes, but never for more than a few minutes, as we all wanted to get home. It was always just long enough for the queasiness to let go, which, oddly enough, it did very quickly once I got out of the car. The entire experience was surreal, and it was very difficult to put into words how strange it was. And we have tried every explanation to solve this, but nothing fits. Something was not right that night, and we all have often wondered what happened that night. About a week ago, I had a strange experience that, looking back on it, might have been a fake encounter, but it could have just been something mundane. So there's this small patch of wood near my house that I sometimes pass through for fun, but I hadn't done it in a while. One day I decided to go through the forest again on my way to pick up something close by, and I noticed a small trail that I hadn't noticed before. Since there was nothing better to do, I decided to follow it and see where it went. But I ended up getting lost, and this ominous presence weighed down on me, causing a sense of fear to creep in. I kept wandering through and eventually reached a paved road. I checked my phone to reposition myself. I went back through and kept apologizing to whatever was in the forest and saying that I'd leave immediately. This seemed to have done the trick, and I reached the end of the woods. Do you think this was a potential fey encounter or just anxiety? This story takes place in a forested mountain setting, which would be just fine for ancient Ireland, Wales, or Scotland. Not only did Wofford, Mooney's confidant, hear this from the experiencer, but he had heard it previously from several second-hand sources, which is why he looked the fellow up for an interview. All of Wofford's sources said that this man was a truthful, hard-headed man. Here is what he was told. When he was 10 to 12 years old, he was practicing bow and arrow near the river and got tired of it. He sat on the riverbank, building a fish trap, and was piling up some stones to wall in the fish. A normal-looking stranger came up to him and remarked that this looked like hard work and he should take a break. The boy was quite willing to do that, but he didn't know if the next offer, to come up the river and have dinner at the stranger's house, was the right thing to do. But customs were different in those days, and the boy went along. The house was fine, and the people were very friendly. He had a nice meal, and while doing so, a friend of his family arrived at the stranger's house, and that made him feel at home. He played with the family's children, went to sleep, woke in the morning, had breakfast, and began to get started for home. He and the original gentleman began walking down a path between a cornfield on one side and a peach orchard on the other. Soon the trail connected with another one, and the man said, "Go by this trail to the ridge ahead, and you'll come to the river road. That will take you straight home." And he turned and went back to his house and farm. The boy walked just a little way towards the river and, in curiosity, turned and looked back. There was neither a peach orchard nor a cornfield. There was neither a house nor a trail. There were only the mountainside and the trees. He continued uneventfully back home, where he was greeted by many who had been looking for him. In explanation, he told his story. He also saw the family friend who had visited that house that evening. But the friend said, "No, I have been with everyone else looking for you." His family told him that no house was there and that the family friend was an impersonation by the Nunnahi. They told him that there have sometimes been the sounds of drumming coming from that mountainside, but he had visited no men but the Nunnahi. The Irish know all about what happened there. Whether it's called the Lost Sod or World Alongside, the boy had passed into the parallel world of the Nunnahi and, just there, passed back out again. Okay, so this did not happen to me, but to my friend. I really would like to hear if anyone has had similar experiences or has any interesting theories. So here it goes. The whole thing takes place in Poland. My friend was traveling with her mom back home from the countryside camping place that they had visited several times before, also a week before. So they knew the road pretty well. There is a long stretch before this road joins the highway. But suddenly, where the road normally goes straight, there was a narrow sandy path and woods behind it, and the road they were on turned right. They followed the road, slightly confused. Apparently they were driving for a while, but there were no other cars, people, or houses. There were just fields and some trees here and there. Then they saw the highway they were supposed to get to, but it was parallel to the road they were on, and there was no way to get to it because it was elevated behind the field and surrounded by noise-canceling screens. There was no road leading to it. At some point, they noticed a man who looked like a farmer, so they stopped and asked for directions. He directed them further down the road, but it also ended at some point and turned into some narrow, unpaved road that led them to a small roundabout, where they finally managed to join the highway. Another strange thing was that when they thanked the man and moved, my friend looked behind, and he was gone. She told her mom that she also couldn't see him in the mirror. And there was only short grass there, so he could not hide or move fast enough to lose him from their sight. He just disappeared. Now, they both traveled there many times after this happened and tried to find this road or roundabout, but they never found any of it, and the road was normal as every time before. There is no other way to get to that highway from the camping site, and it is a relatively short distance. So my question as a skeptic who looks for rational explanations is, has anyone experienced similar glitches? It sort of reminds me of one of the stories from Animatrix, where the kids play at the haunted house. Is this a generated simulation that just had a glitch in its system? What do you think? In Finnish folklore, the forest can function as a port to another realm called Metsenpeito, the forest cover, the world of Haltias, Mahinines, and Meninkanins, which is a kind of distorted and unruly pocket dimension. Usually, due to a mischievous Haltia, Mahinen, or Meninkainen, people can end up in their world through this invisible gate and get lost there forever unless someone conjures or summons them back, but to do so, the spellcaster had to know exactly where the missing person was. However, this is not the only otherworldly gate that appears in Finnish mythology. For example, the deepest point at the bottom of ponds and the North Star, as the Pole Star, are believed to serve as a gate to the underworld, Tuonela. According to folk beliefs, soul birds and soul fish transported the souls of the deceased through them to the afterlife, where they materialized in the condition they had died in. For example, if you had drowned, you were wet; if you had burned, you had burns; and if you had lost your head, you were headless. In addition to this, there was also a third so-called special otherworldly gate, the Lovi, Notch, used by sages, seers, shamans, healers, and spirits. Lovi was a special route through which, for example, healers asked to get strength from the spirits and through which, for example, Finnish shamans traveled to the underworld to ask for important traditional information from spirits and ancestors. Passing through the Lovi was called either Lufstana status, deriving from the Notch, or Levine Lankemanen, falling into the Notch, depending on the situation. When I was 14 years old, I went to a sari store in our subdivision with my housekeeper. It was 5:30 p.m., and it was almost dim. I wanted to go back home and leave her in the store because she still wanted to chit-chat with the store owner. Just before our house is a wide street, and I saw a little girl in a long white dress and long black hair happily skipping. I had the urge to go near her and tell her to go home because it was getting dark. As I was coming for her, she suddenly vanished in front of my eyes like a poof. I was in disbelief. After vanishing, a thin, long, oblongated portal of yellowish white appeared in a distant place where she vanished. The portal disappeared when a tricycle went past it. Fast forward 3 months after the incident. My brother told me that when they had a party on our rooftop at 2 a.m. our cousin broke out of character. They were enjoying themselves, and my cousin was pale and terrified of what he saw. He saw on the same street a little girl in a long white dress and long black hair, happily skipping, then vanished in front of his eyes. I confirmed what I saw was real. The story was found by Professor Michael Swords, who found the data in Ivan Sanderson's book collection. This is what Swords had to say about the find. Ivan Sanderson had a very poor quality copy of several pages of James Mooney's Myths of the Cherokee from the Bureau of American Ethnology Annual Report for 1897-8. I don't know why I even bothered to squint away at the crummy document, but I'm glad that I did. What it was the field information gathered about a type of paranormal being, society of beings, who resembled old Celtic ideas of the Cid, not the little people of Faerie, but the full-sized entities more like the Tuatha De Danann. I was surprised by both the tale told and the fact that Sanderson was even interested, as he shows little interest in such things elsewhere in the collection. Ivan didn't really like the paranormal that much. Maybe he thought that this tale hinted at something more like a lost tribe. Well, I am very interested, even if Ivan was only lukewarm. The introduction to the story that I'm going to tell briefly spoke of this race of magical or paranormal beings called the Nunnehi. They were described as full-sized people, looking just like the local Native Americans, and mainly friendly and occasionally helpful. As they were described, I got more interested. They liked singing and dancing in the forest. Some were said to reside under ancient mounds. Whoa! Just a minute ago, I thought, what's going on here? The Cherokee and the Celts aren't supposed to have made up the same myths. Then I read the story that had been collected. There it was, the characteristic of a tale about an actual encounter rather than a dramatized folk wisdom tale for around the campfire. The more that I find of this stuff, and it has been a walloping great mound of it, the less I believe that one can sustain that nothing paranormal is going on in these incidents. How is the coincidence of these characteristics across the ocean possible, if not because they both arise from a real underlying shared cause? The Cherokee even have their own second and separate group of knee-high little people to go along with the 5+ footers. I will probably go to my grave all the way full in my belief in this all too infrequently manifested reality. They are one of the few things that I've not experienced and would like to do so. Just for fun. This happened 2 Octobers ago, when I came back to South Florida from Gainesville. My friends and I took a trip to visit someone we knew who was studying up there. We left the night of the 30th in order to be back in time for a Halloween party the next day, and we decided we'd go ahead and drive through the Ocala National Forest on the way. There were 5 of us in total, A in the driver's seat, his boyfriend G in the passenger seat, and my friends S and R on either side of me. If you look up a map of the forest, pretty much all of them will show you the 2 main roads, one that runs north and south and one that runs east and west. We entered on the main road from the west and headed east, towards the coast we live on. The road's got a few curves but doesn't make any major turns, not unless you're trying to get onto a different road. It was around 11 o'clock when we entered the forest, and it should have taken us only an hour or just over to make it all the way through. I'm not going to talk about the stuff we saw in the woods that night because, honestly, we're a creative bunch with probably overactive imaginations, and anything like that could potentially be explained or written off. What I will tell you is that everyone in the car remembers looking at the clock around 11:30, and the next time any of us remembers looking back at it was as we were leaving the forest. It was 3 in the morning. What's more, we didn't come out of the forest on the east side, we came out in the northwest corner, which would have required us to take several smaller roads to reach. We did all of this without once turning onto a different road, without making a major turn of any kind, actually, and without ever making a significant change to our speed. Even if we somehow had managed to turn onto multiple different roads without noticing, it shouldn't have taken us 4 hours to get out of that forest. We still talk about it sometimes. I don't think any of us really want an explanation. At the very least, I don't. I'm pretty content with something inexplicable happening to me. It isn't the first, and I'm sure it won't be the last. But I thought you all might like hearing about it. I was out camping and went against my usual morning habits. It's almost like I was hypnotized to go out to the woods at that time of the morning. I didn't go to the washroom, brush my teeth, or have any breakfast. I left my phone behind, still in the same clothes from the day before. I didn't even drink any water. I had the strongest pull to go out and leave it all behind, so I did. I got out there, wandered off the main path into some thick bush, turned around to the path I came from, and was making my way back to the entrance, to go back to my tent, but the entrance was gone. The entrance was a paved path, but it turned to grass once you got to a certain point. I made it past that point, expecting to get to the paved path back, and there was nothing. The grass kept going and going and going. So I turned around, thinking that maybe I confused myself, but I knew where the pathway was. So I ended up going up and down each path that branched out from a sort of central crossroads into the forest. The pathways just kept going and going, they were literally never ending. I tried to follow the sound of the highway to get to a major roadway and find my way back, but each time I'd get closer to the sound would shift back the other way. So, I gave up. I tried the pathways again. That was useless, there were still the same endless pathways as before. In the distance, I heard garbage men cleaning up the park. So I started screaming for help. I could hear them, but they couldn't hear me. So I kept going up and down the paths, up and down the never-ending paths, making it nowhere in particular. The woods were infinite and looked quite a bit different than our native forests here. The trees seemed bigger and older. During all of this, I kept getting the paranoid thought that something was going to come out of the woods to eat me, that there was a wolf man in the woods, prowling and waiting. I also kept thinking to myself, the fairies are dancing with me, they're ducking with me, I'm never going to get out of here, I'm going to die here, they'll find my body out here 50 years from now. I also kept getting the odd feeling that maybe I should take off my shoes. I don't even think that was my own thought. Luckily, I went against it, because now I've heard quite a few missing 411 stories on where search teams find the person's shoes out in the wilderness, and that's all they'll find. It was getting scary. I started pleading, praying, and begging whatever deity I could think of. Eventually I sat down in the center of the crossroads and just begged my way out, saying I was sorry, I don't know what I did to have that happen. At that point, I was starting to resign to my fate, since I really did think I was never going to get out and die there. I stood up and went to try to find the entranceway again, which was where the never-ending pathways through the fairy woods were, but there it was again. The paved pathway back to humanity was there. So I ran all the way back to my tent. I was trapped for a good few hours. It didn't feel that long to me. This was 5 years ago. Last year I went with a friend to check the area out, and it looks completely different, like the woods got up and moved around. I've had many strange experiences in my life, but that was by far the scariest. A little backstory. I commute back and forth to school every day. There are 2 ways that I can get to and from school. If I take the highway, it will take about 20 minutes, but if I take the backcountry roads, it will take about 35 minutes. I sometimes like to take the country roads back just so I can have the windows down and relax after a long day. The country road is a straight shot, there are no turns I have to make, I just drive until I hit back on the highway for the last 5 minutes. Yesterday, I decided that since my one class got cancelled, I would take the country road back home to feel a nice breeze and have a relaxing time. The country road takes about 20 minutes by itself to go through, 15 if I really speed to go through, but I never usually do. I left at around 3 p.m. in the afternoon and had the radio on, was listening to music, had the windows down, and was having a good time. This is usually the time I get to ponder the day and just get my thoughts in order. I realized that as I was driving, the sky was getting darker and darker. As if it is turning into nighttime. I distinctly remember looking at the clock in my car when I first left school, and it was just after 3 p.m., but when I look at the clock now, it says that it is nearly 7:30 p.m. I think to myself that this can't be possible. There is no way that it took me 4 hours to travel a distance I have done dozens of times in about 20. I'm home, and I'm shook. My gas is not significantly different from what I started. My phone's battery is not much different either. I had a soda that I had purchased right before the trip home that was still cold. This is the freakiest thing I have ever experienced in my life. Has this happened to anyone else? I'm a true believer in the Fae. I'm Irish and have always lived in Ireland, where the Fae people are to be taken very seriously. I'm respectful, I leave offerings, and I have what I would say to be a comprehensive understanding and knowledge of the Fae stories, folklore, legends, what's okay to do and say, and what's not. The most important thing to know when dealing with or working with the Fae is that they are very mischievous. They like to play tricks. So, there are so many stories, legends, and instances when a person enters the land of the Fae, a land just adjacent to ours. You can accidentally enter a fairy circle, a circle of mushrooms and flowers, something seemingly normal but not. Now, time passes differently in their world. There are stories of humans entering a fairy circle, or land, and dancing for a few hours, but when they return to our world, they realize many years have passed. For reference, go read the story of Uisín in Tír na Nog, Uisín in the Land of the Young. I had a strange experience many years ago and have been researching since to find any other similar stories but haven't found anything. So I was in the woods. To people outside Ireland or the UK, you may call this the forest. But it was a very small wood or forest. It went in a loop and was connected to the beach, so one half of the loop was muddy and one side was sandy. But it's a small enough loop, and it's only one track. From any point on that track, you can see the rest of the track. So this particular day, I went there with 2 family members to exercise. They were fitter than me, so they ran the track and I walked, and because it was a small track, we did it multiple times. It took me maybe 20 minutes to walk the full circuit. At one point, still walking the track, I looked around for the others, and I couldn't see them. I couldn't hear them. I walked the whole track with no sign of them at all. And then suddenly they both appeared right beside me, and one of them claimed they couldn't see, hear, or find me. They accused me of hiding behind a tree and jumping out when I saw them coming. Now this is crazy, I was certainly not hiding behind a tree. Nor were they. We were all on this small oval-shaped track, but seemingly we weren't. After almost 10 years, what happened this day still lingers in my mind, and I've yet to find any explanation or similar story. When I was a little kid, I lived in the backwoods of Minnesota in a very old house placed smack dab in the middle of the woods, farmland, and next to a lake. Oftentimes, you could hear the sounds of nature, and as you know, the state of Minnesota had 11 native tribes. Nature there sounded like owls, growls, animals, wind, and sometimes, if you listen closely enough, waves. I had a very bad relationship with my family and often ran away from home. My mom and I got into a huge fight one night, and so I ran away from home. In the middle of the night. That was my first mistake. I ran to the edge of the water. The lake was surrounded by woods on the side where my house was located. On the other side, all the docks were located. After I calmed down and took a few breaths, I stopped breathing so heavily, and then I heard it. A breath similar to mine. I whipped around to see what it was, but there was nothing there but trees. My breath hitched and got caught in the back of my throat. When my dad was still alive, he often told me stories as he was Navajo, but I always thought that it was a story in order to make me behave. I remembered every story that he told me the second I heard the breathing. A chill ran down my spine, and I turned around and went back to the water, where a shadow ran across my eyesight. I was so freaked out that I ran. I ran back towards home, and behind my footsteps, I could hear something heavier running behind me. I never turned around, I never looked back. I was so afraid that when I got to the stairs of my house, I tripped and fell, but then crawled up. I reached for the handle and got inside, locking the door behind me. The last thing I ever heard from it was, "I wish you would just listen." From the other side of the door, in my mom's voice, but it was broken up and sounded like radio static. I have never seen it, heard it, or felt its presence before, but I will never run off at night again. I got sucked into a portal in downtown Portland. I started walking backwards without realizing it and turned around to see total darkness and the most fear-dreading fight or flight experience of my life. This happened in August 2017 at the Kiss Car Wash on 1909 West Burnside Street in downtown Portland, Oregon. It's the car wash next to McDonald's. I'd usually park and eat my food while I mindlessly scrolled through my phone. It was nighttime around probably 9 to 11 p.m. Something made me want to get out and throw my food away, something I usually don't do, as I just kind of shove it in the back seat of my car and forget about it. I was outside on my phone scrolling through my newsfeed on Facebook when I started to walk backwards. I didn't realize I was walking backwards until I started to feel gravel under my shoes and realized I was walking up a gravel hill. Notice that I am in a car wash parking lot with a white wall that is 5 feet high in the back and completely fenced around. The whole area is well lit, with McDonald's right across the street, and the car wash has plenty of street lights. I am not high, drunk, or on any kind of strange medication, and I am not asleep because I'm walking around outside. I am not prone to hallucinations of any kind, either. Anyways, I notice the gravel crunching under my feet, and I realize that I've been walking backwards, and I'm like, that's weird, I don't usually do that. It suddenly got a lot quieter, like I wasn't on the side of a main road in downtown Portland. So I turn around, and it is completely pitch black. I swear to God, my vision is not that great as I wasn't wearing my glasses, but I swear to God, I saw about 100 feet away a broken down shack that had a few trees next to it. I got a horrible, uncomfortable feeling that I was extremely out of place and that I needed to sprint back to my car right now. I ran back so ducking fast that I had to grab onto my car to make sure it was still real. I look back, and all I see is the back of the ducking car wash with that goddamn white wall surrounding it. I suddenly get very sleepy and decide to sleep in the back seat of my car, which is comfy with blankets and stuff, but I'm not sure why I'm suddenly so tired after a crazy event. Yeah. So I begin to have the most creepy, intense dreams about old creepy men molesting young prepubescent girls. The last image in the last dream I had before I had enough and forced myself to finally wake up and drive the duck off was the goddamn door of the shack I saw opening, barely just enough to see this giant eye belonging to the child molester looking straight at me. It was like something was trying to suck the energy out of me or cast a spell on me. I've had previous paranormal experiences, and I know that ghosts need energy to create a paranormal event, if that makes sense. I wake up and muster all the energy I have to drive off and explain this crazy ducking experience to my friends that are on Hoyt and Broadway, a 5-minute drive away. They are all like, "What the duck, dude?" and we all hear a girl scream around the block. I go around the corner to investigate, and I black out and wake up in the hospital, saying that I had a seizure, and one of my friends called an ambulance. I swear, whatever was previously on the land before it was developed into that car wash was evil. Children were hurt and tortured over there. It didn't like that I left and wanted to hurt me, dude. Duck. My wife and I are small business owners, giving us the freedom to take some last-minute trips. I approached her on Thursday and said, "Hey, let's fly to Colorado tomorrow and get a nice Airbnb close to Breckenridge." My search led me to a nice little cabin, where I did not quite realize how remote it was. The cabin was said to have some really nice trails in the area and had plans to hike around the next few days, nothing far, at most a mile or two. There was also said to be a creek right down the hill by the cabin. The host said we would definitely need a 4x4 to get there, and she wasn't wrong. I went camping as a child with my dad, so staying at a cabin seemed like a night at a hotel. When we got there, the place was beautiful, well maintained, and should have shaped up for an incredible weekend. I will mention the last 5 miles or so, when I started feeling very uneasy and on high alert. Mind you, I was only going 5 to 10 miles per hour as it was a very icy and windy road up to an elevation of 11,000 feet at the base of a large granite mountain. Again, this meant nothing to me at the time. It took nearly 45 minutes to reach the cabin. Upon arriving, I remember before getting out of the Jeep looking at my wife and saying something of the sort that we really needed to pay attention out here. We are very far from help and would take a while to get help if we needed it. I was feeling very uneasy at this point but assumed it might have been from the stressful drive. It was the least favorite drive of my life, and I'm a car fanatic. I digress. We got all of our belongings inside. It is around 3 a.m. at this time. We flew out late Friday after work, arriving in Denver at 11 p.m. I cleared the house quickly, just hoping to ease my anxiety, but within the next 5 to 10 minutes, I was at the point of feeling in danger. I checked every door and window multiple times, and my wife also expressed that she was starting to feel a little scared or that bad feeling mentioned earlier. We went back up to the top bedroom and locked that door as well, then planned on getting some rest. I tried for about 30 minutes and ended up being too paranoid and in actual fear. In 28 years, it was the most afraid I have ever felt, and I kept thinking, I wish I had my rifle. I felt as if something was watching the house and was bad news, something I didn't even want to meet with a gun. My wife became ill at this point, vomiting several times. Not to worry her or stress her more, I kept assuring her that everything was okay and that we were safe. She, not feeling well, decided to get some rest, but I couldn't have slept if her life depended on it. I was thoroughly shaken, with no reason to be. At 6 a.m., I made the decision that we were leaving. I paid for another Airbnb in Denver without caring if this one would be refunded. No, we are far from rich. We immediately grabbed all of our stuff and got back on the road. As soon as I made the decision to leave, the overwhelming feeling of doom started to ease. As we made it down the mountain, it continued to ease. Once we were back on the highway, I felt fine again, as did she. I told her that I didn't know what that was or why we felt that way, but I definitely made the right decision by leaving. When we discovered Miss 411, the pattern fit so much that it really shook us up. There was granite close to a water source. My wife fell extremely ill, and I cannot put into words how afraid we felt up there. It was like a switch flipped. We shouldn't have been there. It was night and day from the excitement on the trip into the worst fear by far I've ever experienced, back to a feeling like we made the right call. One of the first videos I saw of missing 411 was of a few people going missing within 20 miles from that cabin. It still gets my heart going when I think about it. It might all be in my head, but I genuinely believe that if we stayed, something really awful was going to happen. I felt as if I would be fighting for my life and needed to get out of there, that there was something there. We did not feel alone. I'd bet my life that we weren't and were smart for leaving. I just got a really weird text or call from a trusted friend. I guess while he was doing a solo run, he got chased by an extremely lanky brown figure that looked like tree branches. I don't exactly believe in this kind of stuff, but the timing and his behavior are really freaking me out. He's genuinely spooked. He wouldn't even tell me what he saw at first, but after he gave me the play-by-play. Like, bro, what? He says he was hitting a road we're familiar with. He saw a person behind him running. Then he realized the person was catching up, so he got spooked and sped up, but the person was still gaining. As it got closer, he realized it was like a disproportionate stick figure that literally looked like it was made of twisted wood and that its movements didn't even make sense. It was like it was glitching or phasing. It got next to him and kept up for a good 10 seconds. Triple digits. He thinks it was a skinwalker or something, since he was near a reservation. I think it was aliens. But apparently stick people are a thing, and his story kind of falls in line with others. So what kind of extra-dimensional being decided to chase down my friend's tuner car on a Wednesday night? This story is from when I was a teenager, around 1995 to 1996. It happened to me and my cousin Matt on Devil's Featherbed Road, not kidding, this is the actual name, you can look it up if you want, where I lived a large portion of my life. So, it starts out with me and Matt making ourselves some makeshift whips to play around with. The idea was that we could use them to wrap around small trees so that we could use them as leverage to get around the steep-ass hills around where I live and to just latch onto something and swing around for the hell of it. We then decided it was time to go test them out. We went into the house to tell my mom where we were going. She then told us that we shouldn't be out long because she was making dinner and it would be done in about half an hour. Remember this because it is important later on. We then went down to the bottom of the property, which is a set of small cliffs, and proceeded to climb down our usual path and descend to the bottom of the hill where the creek runs. This trip in itself takes about 15 minutes. I had also checked my watch before we left to make sure we were not late for dinner, as I was a growing teenager who was always hungry, and I do mean always. We tested the whips on the way down, and they worked great. You could slap them around a tree, and it would support almost my entire weight most of the time. In our excitement about our success, our time restrictions got pushed to the back of our minds, and we decided to go exploring down the creek. While exploring, we completely lost track of time for a while until my stomach reminded me it was past dinner time. I looked down at my watch and yelled to Matt, "Holy SHT, we have been gone for 4 hours." We quickly assessed the situation and looked for the shortest way back to the house. We noted that the creek had been making a lazy curve to the right the entire way down and decided that the best way to go would be to go straight up the side of the hill and follow the ridge back to my family's property. We went up the side, and when we got to the top, we noticed that the entire sky was blanketed with large, dark clouds threatening a downpour. As I was paranoid about how long we had been gone, I kept checking my watch as we followed the ridge back. Then I noticed something odd. As we went and I checked the watch, the minutes, which was all I was paying attention to, seemed to make a massive jump. I pointed it out to Matt, and we both agreed it was rather odd. Then, the next time I looked, I noticed that the hour had gone backward. When I showed it to him, it mystified both of us, and we agreed that our minds must be ducking with us. When we finally got back to the bottom of our field, we noticed the sky was quite different than it was just a while ago. The huge dark clouds we had seen earlier were barely visible over the next mountain and were visibly moving our way. This made us start to question what was going on much more thoroughly. When we got to the house, we were amazed to find my mom still making dinner. Rather confused, I asked her how long we had been gone. She replied, "About 15 minutes. One time when I was young, somewhere between 6 and 8, we lived on a 7-acre plot of land, of which 2 were not forests. I used to spend hours exploring those woods and had many secret bases around. Now we were closer to the front of the property and had close neighbors on both sides. To the right of our property was a large open field with a hill, and on the other side was a newly sold plot where they were clearing an area to build a home. Now, that left side is where the majority of the woods were located, and I remember seeing the marked trees that were the edge of our property only about 2 yards into the woods, and it went a bit of a stretch back. One day I went towards one of my camps and noticed an opening in the trees I hadn't explored yet, so I decided to go explore. Now I should have reached the line of trees that was our property edge, but it just kept going, deeper and deeper. Eventually I came to a huge clearing, with a natural pond and a giant willow tree hanging over it, reeds and cattails in most of the pond, and long grass in the pond, like it had been flooded. Now, the area I lived in did not flood, nor do we have natural willows or springs. I remember I was worried about getting lost, so I made sure to not go too far into the clearing and headed back the way I came. The weird thing is, when I came back, it was a shorter trip to get back, and I never found that clearing again, and even weirder is that a few days later we drove past that plot of land, and the area I should have explored through the woods to get to the willow pond had long since been cleared out. To begin, this happened roughly 3 weeks ago while traveling back from Winnipeg to the PA, Manitoba, Canada. Me and a friend I'll call G went to Winnipeg for the night, traveled there during the evening and came back the following day at 1 p.m. The way to Winnipeg was normal, it took us 6 hours as usual. I've done this trip numerous times, as the PA is my hometown, which I've recently moved back to from Winnipeg. On the way back, the first 3-1/2 hours go by normally. I was driving the speed limit most of the time, as it was icy and snowing most of the time. So we come up to the turnoff, where Highway 6 turns off onto the 60, at about 4 p.m. At this point, the conditions are ideal, and the sun is just about at the horizon. It was a beautiful sky with a crimson sun. This is where things got really strange. The first odd instance happened about 20 minutes on this highway. A red van overtook us right before a right turn and rounded a sharp bend. When we came around the bend, the van had vanished, and it was a long, straight high for a bit. I thought this was weird, but I didn't pay any mind to it, nor did I mention it to my friend. Shortly after this, I made a comment about how gorgeous the sky was. By this time, the sun was just cresting the horizon at about 11 o'clock. By this time, it's about 4:45, so we've been on the highway for 45 minutes. This highway takes about an hour until you get to the next turn off, which is 10, the final turn off en route to the PA. We drive for the next 20 minutes without words, just with the radio playing. Then my friend G made the comment, "Have you noticed there hasn't been any road signage?" I didn't realize it, but there were no signs indicating when a turn was coming up, nor were there any signs in regards to how far we are from towns in kilometers, no signs whatsoever. At this point, I noticed the sun hadn't moved an inch in the sky. On top of this, we haven't seen any other vehicles in a while. I thought this was a ducking strange man, and so did my friend. Unnerved, I sped up, going between 120 and 140 kilometers per hour. I started having this overwhelming feeling that something was ducking wrong. Then I noticed another anomaly among the other glaring things that are already making this experience really ducked up. All the trees were the same height, and the tree line was extremely dense, like a wall of trees. This was scary because I then realized this scenery was not at all what it should be. Where we were should have been a sparse tree line with small ponds and marshland on both sides of the highway. We've been on this highway for 2 hours now, the sun still hasn't moved, there are still no road signs, no traffic, and we're not where we should be. Me and G are stuck on this highway, and we're starting to get scared, trying to piece together and figure out what the duck is happening. We've both lived our fair share of paranormal phenomena, not to mention traumatic experiences at that. I've known G my whole life, and this experience is undeniably our most terrifying. Out of nowhere, the sun sets unnaturally fast, which takes maybe 2 minutes. We are enveloped in the darkness of a starless night without a moon. I am scared. G is scared. 2 25-year-old men were pretty well shaken, and just when this ominous, oppressive feeling was unbearable, we came to the turnoff, out of nowhere. 3 hours later, we were stuck on that ducking highway that takes barely over an hour to travel. But it didn't end there. Just when I thought we were returning to normality, I glanced in the rearview mirror, because I thought for the first time in 3 hours I'd seen headlights. I was wrong. In the backseat sitting behind me on the driver's side was a black human silhouette with glowing yellow eyes. G and I both saw it. I couldn't believe what we were experiencing. All of what happened is so unreal and fantastical, but in my life, I believe what you've read is real and articulated to the best of my ability. The next hour and a half were terrifying and mostly set in silence. We finally pulled into the PA shortly before midnight. We were stuck for 2.5 hours in some sort of limbo with unreal anomalies that made no sense, and we were totally conscious and aware the whole time, making note of the time. We are totally lost on an explanation of what happened. The Little Wanderer. Alice Rachel Peck, aged 3 years and 4 months, wandered away from her home in Burns Valley on Thursday, August 25, 1898, in search of her mother, who had gone on an errand. The little girl traveled an old and unused bark road, climbed over a high and very rough mountain, and there, worn out with hunger and without a bonnet or shoes, for 3 days and nights had nothing to eat but a few huckleberries, while friends and neighbors were diligently searching for her or her remains. She was found on Sunday morning, August 28, at 7:30, by William Bear, sound and well. She neither smiled nor cried as 200 voices rang out the glad tidings of great joy, 5 miles from her home in the mountains. While her parents were in great agony at home, they were soon relieved when hearing the many voices and trumpets proclaiming that the lost had been found. On the same morning the child was found, and in the same vicinity, from 8 until 11:30, 13 rattlers, 2 vipers, and 2 copperheads were killed. All returned happy, but some were very worn out. The majority of those who participated in the child hunt saved their canes as relics of the day. In the fall of 1980, I ran a small business as a construction contractor in Eugene, Oregon. During the slow times and in between jobs, I would don my backpack and hiking boots and disappear into the mountains for weeks at a time, enjoying the peaceful solitude of long hikes. At that time, I was single and didn't answer to anyone, so I was free to do what I wanted when I wanted. On the trip in question, I decided to hike the old Malala Indian Trail that followed the ridge tops from Saddle Blanket Mountain to Oak Ridge, one of the Native Americans' favorite summer camps and trading centers. It was a beautiful August day. 2 days into the hike, I expected to be gone about 2 weeks, when, literally out of the blue, the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me in my life occurred. It would change my perspective on reality forever. I was walking along the trail, enjoying the strong breeze and bright sunshine, when, in the middle of a step, everything around me started to turn gray and blurry. The only way I can describe it is as if suddenly I was looking through someone else's prescription sunglasses. I finished one step and started another. Every inch I moved forward, the darkness increased, and the gray blurring turned into a jumble of shapes that made no sense. I then seemed to pass a barrier, and everything started to return to focus when my foot reached the ground. On the second step, everything around me had changed. Day had turned into night, and there was no wind. All the Douglas fir and pine trees had been replaced with thick jungle-like growth. The cool, thin mountain air was replaced with humid, thick air. There were no stars in the sky, but there was a diffused light that let me see everything clearly. However, I couldn't tell what the light source was. As often happens when the human body receives a massive dose of adrenaline, the entire incident appeared like it was in slow motion, and even though I was only there for a second or two, I had time to observe my surroundings. The silence was broken by a continuous, high-pitched keening sound, and I was nearly overwhelmed with a sense of fear and danger. My momentum caused me to take one more step before stopping in my tracks. It was at this point that I heard a whispered gotcha over my right shoulder. I couldn't tell if I heard it with my ears or inside my head. The word wasn't directed at me, but something said the word quietly to itself. I was so terrified, I actually felt my heart stop for a moment. That whispered word is what saved me. I opened my mouth, gasped in a huge gush of thick air, and recoiled backward in the same footsteps I had entered wherever I was. As I threw myself backward, I looked over my right shoulder. A dark-colored, hairy right hand and arm were reaching for my throat over my shoulder. The hand had pale ivory spade-shaped fingernails. The nails looked clean and almost had a manicured look to them. The thumb was placed lower, towards the wrist, on the hand than a human's is. Both hands and arms were thin and powerful looking, and both were covered with thick, coarse black hair. I got a good look at it because the thumbnail grazed my neck. It did not break the skin, as I moved backwards. As I continued backwards, the hand clutched where my neck had been a split second before, and it seemed to fade off into the distance as I returned through the portal. I took 2 more steps backwards, and everything reversed itself from what had just happened. The world around me became lighter, the fir and pines gradually came back into view, and by the 3rd step, I was back on Saddle Blanket Mountain. I continued to move backwards in terror, and as I did, I observed that where I had just come from was a shimmering oval patch of air about the size of a large door. The woods behind it looked like they were underwater. By the 5th backward step, the shimmering area seemed to just evaporate, and everything was back to normal. By then, my lungs had nearly burst from the volume of air I had inhaled during the huge gasp I had just taken. My body felt like it was on fire from the adrenaline surge. I spun around and ran back down the trail as fast as my legs could carry me, and I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I spent nearly 2 days getting to that place and about 3 hours getting back. On my way home, I was absolutely horrified at the thought of what would happen if I were to drive my truck into something like that. It had been a trap, pure and simple. Whatever it was that tried to kill me somehow kept the portal hidden from me on the way in, and I didn't actually see it until I was back out again. I had terrible nightmares for years and still haven't come to grips with what happened. My fingers are trembling, and the hair is standing up on the nape of my neck as I write this. In July of this year, 2016, I was on a personal retreat at a yoga center in Colorado. I too live in Colorado, am a fairly experienced hiker, and have been to this facility several times over the years, so I have been on solo hikes on this land with some familiarity with the trails. The 2nd day of my retreat, I set out in the afternoon on a solo hike. I took my cell phone to take photos. About 3/4 mile into the hike on a well-marked trail, I walked maybe 5 feet off trail to have a look at a brightly colored sign attached to a tree that gave the name of the national forest I was in. I read the sign, turned around to get back on the trail, and literally, the trail was not there. I found myself in a different location. How could this be possible? I thought to myself, and then, of course, one begins to panic when things go so wonky. I calmed myself and circled the area, trying to find the trail or some way to get back on track, but it was not there. I made sure not to wander from the small area I was in, yet I was still searching for a way out. I retraced my steps to find the tree with the brightly colored National Park placard as a way to reorientate my location, but it was not there either. As I walked in the direction I came from, there was a barbed wire fence all around. I then began to get what I can only describe as a very creepy feeling that I was being watched, and the panic set in again. I knew I must not panic and that I had to stay in the area I was in. I felt as if there was an energy trying to get me to go in a certain direction, but my gut, my intuitive self, said no, don't go there. Then I thought to call 911 or my husband, who was 30 miles away. I'm not sure if I could have gotten service, but again, my gut strongly said no, do not get on your phone. Then, in the distance, I began hearing the voices of people talking. Oh good, I thought, I'll call out for help, as I just assumed that if I could hear them, they would hear me. So I cried out for help, screaming for help as loud as I could. Then I began to have this terrifying feeling that the sound of my voice was going nowhere. The best way, in retrospect, I can describe it is that I was very small, in a petri dish being looked at, and the sound of my voice was being muffled. I literally thought to myself at this point, oh, this is how some people go missing. That's when I knew I had to absolutely find a way out. I ran straight away, and there in front of me was a field, so I just began running in the direction of the yoga center. The grasses got taller and taller as I ran, and they were taller than me in places. It was a very dry and hot Colorado summer, but this field was like a marsh or bog with dips and holes. I was sinking in, as if in quicksand, as I was running, and at one point I badly twisted my ankle. It felt like I was going in slow motion, but I was running as fast as I could. Eventually, I got to a trail just near the facility. I sat down on a chair by a small lake that is on the property and was really in a dazed and confused state as to what I had just experienced. Mostly, I was just incredibly thankful to be sitting there. I remember too, my eyes were burning badly, like I had been doused with some sort of chemical. For days, they were quite red and still burning. I was not able to walk as my ankle had swelled up like a cantaloupe, so my dear husband picked me up a day earlier. I was wearing bright pink pants, by the way. Also of curious interest, a few weeks after this incident, a boot with a foot in it had been found at a ski area very near where I had this experience, and in January, a worker from this same ski area had gone missing. He has not been found. The foot was not his. My husband had read Dave Paulide's work and research on Bigfoot a few years earlier, but we weren't familiar with his work on missing people in national forests. He suggested I listen to his interviews. I haven't stopped reading and listening to Dave's incredible stories. I now have a deeper understanding of the notion that we are not alone. I was driving home late one night on a back road about 20 years ago. The only light in the area was coming from my headlights. Then I saw what appeared to be a lawn gnome standing on the double yellow line. It was maybe 18 inches tall and appeared to be wearing a conical hat, a long-sleeved shirt, and a vest. I thought someone had set a lawn gnome on the road as a joke, so I started to slow down so I could move it to the side of the road so no one would hit it with their car. When I was about 25 feet away, the gnome's head jerked and looked right at me. In an instant, the gnome started running, first off the road, then up a steep hill, where I lost sight of it among the brush. It freaked me right out. I drove to the house as quickly as I could and ran from my car to the house, where I promptly locked the door behind me. I went around the house to confirm that every exterior door and window were locked. I went upstairs and collapsed on my bed. I was eerily calm by then, and looking back, I still should have been freaked out. I went right to sleep with the lights still on. When I was young, I lived in quite a small town in Queensland. The whole town was surrounded by bush in every direction for hundreds of kilometers, and we had so much room to play. This particular story is about the first time we got drunk. In the winter, the level of water would drop significantly. Enough for us to camp in the river bed. My best friend's parents owned a pub at the time, so we were in charge of getting the drinks for a little camping trip we had planned so we could finally pop our drunk cherry. The place we had in mind was out near an old indigenous settlement, where a few creepy things have happened to us over time. So we made our way down to the river bank, which was low on the side we came in and really high on the other side. You couldn't see on the other side through all of the trees on the top, and it was kind of unnerving knowing someone could be up there watching and you wouldn't know. There are about 7 of us kids in the camp, and our parents have no idea where we are or what we are doing. We lied and said we were staying at a friend's place. We set up camp and built a little shelter for all of us to sleep under. We are all set up and start drinking as the sun is setting. Soon it's dark, and we are in full swing, mixing drinks, singing songs, and throwing stuff in the water. And generally making a whole heap of noise. As we are starting to wind down, one of my friends says he saw something move at the top of the river bank on the steep side. We all say that he is full of shit and should calm down, but he is adamant there is someone up there, so we all start calling out, "Come out, you coward," and other such things. Being brave goes well beyond our years. To our surprise, a bearded man wearing straggly clothes and no shoes comes out of the tree line, stands on the edge of the bank, and just stares at us. We all go silent, waiting for him to do something, but for about 5 minutes, he just stands there, and then he retreats back into the tree line. We all talk amongst ourselves and get a bit nervous, but we soon forget it. About an hour later, the guy is back, but he isn't on the bank anymore. He is coming out of the shadows from the other side of the bank and entering our camp. He comes over and stands next to the fire. Just joins our group of 12-year-old kids and stands there. We are all officially a bit scared and don't really know what to do, so we just sit there in silence. Eventually, one of my friends gets up the courage to speak to him. "Day mate. How are you? Are you okay?" The guy just stares at my friend and then starts staring at each of us in turn for a little bit of time spent on each of us. My friend tries again. "Hey. Are you okay? What's your name?" The man snaps his head back at my friend and stares at him wide-eyed for at least 2 minutes before answering. Without blinking, he says in a raspy whisper, "That's none of your ducking business." And he hisses like a cat. Then this guy just jumps back, screaming and staring at the fire like it had just appeared, and runs off up the steep bank in record time. It was impossible to get up this thing, so we all stood there speechless. We decide that it's best if we just stoke the fire up because it is about a 19-kilometer walk in the pitch black back to town, and we weren't confident on that. So stoke the fire we did. We sat up for as long as we could, keeping watch. Not really talking. We all eventually dozed off, one by one. When we woke up in the morning, everything was gone. All of our alcohol, all of our bags, all of our shoes, and all of our blankets. Everything. The creepy thing was that none of us awoke as someone robbed us blind, and there was not a single footprint. We were sleeping in wet sand, so there should have been footprints everywhere, but there were none. It looked like we hadn't even been there. Needless to say, we bailed and ran most of the way back to town. Our feet were all cut up and messy by the time we got back. We never told our parents about our camping trip, and I think we never will. Missing 411, the Oz factor during encounters. January 1988, Benton, Louisiana. A father and daughter were driving over to the mother's place of work to pick her up. They stopped in the parking lot a little early. Over the nearby interstate came a flash of light that entered the lot and revealed itself to be a metallic disc with something like scoops all along the bottom perimeter. At this point, the environment changed. This machine sat there and looked at us, and we looked at it, and I guess it must have been a good minute and a half. And it seemed at this time there were no cars moving. I didn't hear a thing in the world. Nothing. Just like the world stood still, it just seemed like I was in a trance, like there was nothing else in the world but us and the machine. As soon as the machine left, traffic on I-20 came alive, and the parking lot became active. September 1974, Sterling, Illinois. 3 people were standing on their farm at about 9 p.m. when the tops of their silos lit up. Suddenly, the light source moved directly over them, and the whole environment got absolutely silent. The light was abnormal. I don't think that any of us moved, but I can remember looking at my husband and the other man, and it was like you could see not exactly through them, but it was kind of bluish white, and you could almost see not really their bones but the framework of the bones, because it was darker than the rest of their body was. I remember just standing there thinking, this is weird. Look. I can almost see through them. The odd light then doubled its oddness by drawing gradually up into whatever was its source, like an elevator. Whatever was left, the environment returned to normal. July or August 1975, Pittsburgh, Kansas. A married couple was driving in the evening, 9 p.m., when they spotted a falling star. That star, however, turned in its trajectory, flew over them, and continued just ahead of them above the highway. The object had several very bright panels, the light from which obscured the shape of the thing itself. All during this pacing experience, the environment changed to one of completely dead silence. More oddly still, when the wife would say something to her husband, the object would do something coincidentally related to the comment. Then it just blinked out of existence, at least as far as they could tell. Perhaps just another coincidence, but the rest of the way home, they were treated to a dense parade of wildlife: skunk, possum, raccoons, dogs, cats, rabbits, all on the go, as if they were exceptionally excited. December 1959, Praberta, California. A truck driver was heading to work at 5:45 a.m. His radio began going out, and his lights began to dim. He pulled off the road and got out. He noticed that, unlike any other time in his life, the road was completely devoid of cars. Despite the time of day, the road was normally heavily traveled. And there was something else. Hanging over the road behind him was a large, bright, green crescent. He was terrified by this and broke into a full-body sweat. The thing seemed to be drawing him towards it. I felt like I was being sucked up in space toward the object as by a magnet. He thought about getting his gun from the truck and firing at the object. His thoughts cleared, and he rushed to the truck, only to find that the object was gone. The truck's lights had come back on, and he began to drive away. Smelling a burning odor, he makeshift repaired the truck and limped into work. He later found that both his battery and his generator were badly damaged and had to be replaced. November 1978, Daventry, England. A school teacher was leaving a school party due to a crashing headache. Skeptics have seized upon this as the cause of what follows, and each of us may have our own opinions. She was driving home and saw a UFO above the road, 2 connected spheres, one with a green light emission, one with a red one. Traffic at this point was normal, no Oz, yet. After driving a bit further on, she stopped, got out, and watched the thing from a different perspective. Getting back into the car and driving on, she found that the accelerator pedal would not work properly and the car was slowing towards a stop. There was no noise from the engine at all. Still, the automobile continued to creep forward at a slow pace. At this point, the rural road was empty. She calmly got herself together and went through a startup sequence while rolling, and it worked. She proceeded on for about 300 meters normally. The car entered an area where the trees overhang the road like a canopy or tunnel. At the end of that tunnel, suddenly, without any awareness of how it happened, she was sitting in a stopped vehicle, and the surroundings were totally black, no light anywhere. This was at the border of Church Stowe, a place she knew very well. Although she was not even able to see her own vehicle, she felt strangely calm and unafraid. Suddenly, a brilliant globe of white light appeared on the left side of the car. She was immediately able to recognize exactly where she was in relation to the known buildings in the area. Then the light extinguished, total blackness. On again, a bit further around the car. Off. On. 15 times, the globe cycled a bit further around her. Fascinated, she sat there, taking in every detail, and then the whole world was back to normal lighting. What was really wrong about this, though, was that she was now in motion, driving 30 yards further down the road in the village. She had been stopped. All of her senses during the 15 periods of illumination told her that she was in the same spot and not in motion. She drove straight home and told her stunned police inspector husband about the encounter over dinner. Later on that evening, she had another headache, which never occurred again. I grew up in eastern Minnesota, right by the confluence of the St. Croix and Mississippi rivers. About 5 miles southwest of my parents' house is a small community called Gray Cloud Island, GCI. You may have heard this name bouncing around a few paranormal and ghost hunting websites. There have been a lot of rumors surrounding this place, things like ghostly lights appearing at night, a row of headstones in the cemetery that would number 12 if you counted from right to left, but 13 if you counted from left to right, people being chased by ghostly white pickup trucks that suddenly disappear. There have also been rumors that the KKK and cults of Satanists meet on the island. Here are a couple specific incidents that my friend and I have experienced while exploring Gray Cloud Island. 1. One summer day about 2 years ago, my friend and I were hiking along the north side of the lower island. Since it is so sparsely inhabited, the island is actually a great place for wildlife, so we were birdwatching and collecting insects as we hiked. We came across a long abandoned field that was slowly reverting to the prairie that had covered the island 200 years ago. As I was pursuing a butterfly, I stumbled over something partly hidden in the grass. I reached down to examine what it was and found an animal's skull, about as long as my hand, almost completely cleaned of its skin. My friend collects skulls and bones, so I happily informed him of my find. He quickly determined that it had belonged to a domestic dog. As we looked closer, we found about 4 or 5 cervical vertebrae beneath the grass. We scoured the area for more bones, but we found nothing else. Normally, I have no issues with bones. But it slowly started dawning on us what we had just discovered: a dog's head and neck bones with not a single other bone around. Somebody had decapitated a dog and left its head here in the field. This may give some credibility to the Satanist rumors. Maybe it's the power of suggestion, but once I realized what this skull probably was, I felt uneasy while it was in my presence. 2. The whole island is littered with old dumps where farmers would put all their trash from the late 1800s into the 1960s. These are great places to find antique bottles and such, so we frequently visit them. Earlier this year, my friend was excavating at an old dump, maybe 15 to 20 yards off the main road, back far enough into the woods that he could still see the road from where he was, but cars couldn't really see him. Suddenly, a small drone appeared and kept buzzing around above him. About 15 minutes later, a woman walking a dog came down the road. She was visibly distressed and was walking back and forth almost aimlessly, looking very unnatural overall. My friend was getting uneasy at this point and sat motionlessly, watching the woman from his spot in the woods. The loud, staticky noise of a walkie-talkie coming from the direction of the woman interrupted the silence. She immediately reached to turn down the volume and stared into the woods, almost directly at my friend, as if she knew he was there and had heard the noise. He was pretty freaked out now and packed up his stuff, snuck out through the back of the woods, and hauled his ass to his car. 3. One time my friend and I tried to find a location on the island called Medicine Woods that was mentioned in early books on the area. This was a site that was sacred to the Dakota and was, from what we could determine, somewhere on the northeastern corner of the island. On our hike from the main road, the landscape slowly changed from open fields to woodland to denser forest. After maybe half a mile, we reached a section of the forest where the understory opened up. The trees here were very large and looked much older than those where we had been walking before. The whole forest suddenly became eerily quiet. In front of us were a handful of large, gently sloping piles of earth. We had stumbled upon some of the last remaining native burial mounds. We didn't stick around very long, partly out of deference but mostly out of the eerie and unsettling feeling the place brought us. I am from Finland, and that's also where these things I'm about to describe to you happened. This was some years ago, pre-smartphone/GPS era. It was the end of the summer, and myself and 2 friends were on a camping trip way up in the north, in Lapland. The mosquito season was over, and the weather was cooling down in anticipation of the coming fall. The three of us had packed food and gear for a 10-day trek. The car we arrived in had been left in the parking lot of a visitor center. This happened within the premises of Urho Kekkonen National Park, a 985 square mile stretch of wilderness near the Russian border. The terrain there varies greatly, from treeless and semi-mountainous to dense forests of spruce, pine, and dwarf birch. There are lots of swamps. Seeing reindeer is not uncommon, and some nights you might hear wolves in the distance. You can run into a bear or a wolverine in this place, but of course, normally they avoid people. We mostly camped in a tent, but some nights we used shelters and simple huts provided for travelers free of charge. The trip had lasted 5 days, and we were at the furthest point of any kind of civilization we were going to be on that particular outing, truly in the middle of nowhere. There really is nothing there. There are no villages, towns, or industries. The place is a national park after all. Seeing other hikers happen from time to time, you'd see some people in the distance, maybe, but very rarely would you come face to face with anyone. So, in the middle of our trip, we were camped in a small clearing with woodland extending around us for a considerable distance in all directions. It was already dark, we had eaten our evening meal, and all three of us were jammed in our only tent. It was a bit cramped, but we fit. We took turns carrying it during the hikes. We were just exchanging jokes and crude humor in the dark, like guys in their 20s do, about to go to sleep in our sleeping bags. When we quieted down, we began to hear talking. And the sound of machinery. Given our location, this was profoundly weird. We camped in a tent because there were no huts nearby. Maybe there was another camp somewhere near us? We couldn't quite make out what was being said, but it was a human voice, no doubt about it. But nothing could really explain the sound of heavy machinery. It sounded like an excavator or a tank, something big, powerful, and really not too far away. Combined with the sound of talking, we thought construction yard. But at that time of night, in an unpopulated, protected nature reserve? We got out of our tent. It was cold and pitch black, and the campfire had some coals still glowing. We took out our flashlights. My two buddies have always been a lot braver than me. The sound was clearly coming from the north, maybe half a kilometer away. We thought the construction might be going on behind a small hill some distance away. We could see no lights or anything. We still could not make out what was being said. The speaking-like voice was monotonous, and it was impossible even to say what language was being used. It still sounded a lot like a person speaking, though. You may be aware of the sort of spooky phenomenon of hearing a human voice in static. Maybe you've used a blowdryer and been sure someone is talking. Turn it off, and it was just something the brain tried to interpret from the steady hum. Maybe it was sort of like that, it's hard to explain. The machinery-like sound continued, not loud, but you could sort of make out the powerful engine, at times accelerating or adding power, at times idle. My two friends resolved to go find out what was going on. We put our warm clothes back on, donned boots, and I sat next to the dying fire, adding some more wood to it. I would stay at camp while my buddies left to check out this mystery construction yard in the middle of nowhere in the Lapland woods. So, there I sat. The guys took out their maps, took a compass, headed left, and I could hear them make their way through the forest and see the light from their flashlights. Then they were gone. The weird sounds continued, unaltered. They were gone for 15 minutes, then maybe 30. Then comes the better part of an hour. It was odd, judging by the volume of the sound. They should have reached it, checked it out, and been back already. I added more firewood and tried to make out what the person talking was saying, but it was too tinny and obscure. The guys had been away for over 2 hours. I figured they had stayed for coffee with the construction guys or something. Then the sound stopped. Just like that. It just ended, all at the same time. The engine sound and the voice both just quit. It was very silent. I waited for another 30 minutes, very worried now that something had happened and that maybe my friends were lost. Should I go and try to find them? I shouted their names several times, and I built the fire pretty big. I was scared shitless when suddenly I saw the flashlights of my friends. Apparently, they were returning in a hurry. The guys got back to camp, out of breath. They told me the following: they had followed the sound beyond the small ridge in the distance. There was nothing there, and it seemed like they were not getting any closer to the source of the sounds. They had to stop every now and then, be quiet, and listen to it to be able to walk towards it. They walked and stopped like this for some time, then realized they were not getting any closer. The sounds did not change in volume at all. They decided to go just a bit further several times, when suddenly the sound just stopped like someone pressed a button on a recording. They realized they had been going on for a long time. They were in the middle of the dark woods, alone. They reversed the heading and started back at a brisk pace. Eventually, They saw my big ass fire from the top of a hill and found their way back. The weird thing is, we seemed to think the sound stopped at different times. They had been gone for 2.5 hours in total. They said the sound stopped around 1 hour, 15 minutes after they left. They then started to head back immediately, with the return trip taking a bit longer even though they kept a good pace. They apparently wandered around a bit. For me, the sound stopped at the 2-hour mark, just 30 minutes before they returned. We did not go to sleep that night. Nothing more happened on that trip, and we never found out what the weird construction yard-like sound was about. When we returned to the park visitor center some 5 days later, we asked around, but no one knew of any ongoing construction taking place in the whole national park area. It has been bugging me ever since. I will start by saying this happened in the summer of 2000. My friends, JF and JD, for short, and I all grew up in our small town in Ohio. We frequented the woods behind our homes and would play games like hide and seek or capture the flag very often with other neighborhood kids. Needless to say, we all knew the woods like the backs of our hands. One day, while bored, JF and I decided to go hiking in the woods. We did this all the time back then, mind you. About 30 minutes into the hike, we stumble upon an area with 8 perfectly lined up pine trees and a small white house hidden behind the pines. We had never seen these trees or houses before in this area, so we were thoroughly confused. We could see no trails or driveways leading to the property, so we had no clue how this house could have been built out in the middle of the woods. The house, from all outward appearances, seemed to be in good condition for the most part and mostly unassuming. We both started getting an uneasy feeling and decided to turn back, leave the area, and head back home. Segue to a couple weeks later. I'm over at my friend JD's house to play some PS2. At some point, we start talking about the woods, and he tells me about a little white house he came across in the woods. He goes into detail about the same rows of pine trees and how he got a creepy feeling when he got close to the house and split. I then told him about how JF and I stumbled upon the same house a couple of weeks earlier and got the same feeling. Later that weekend, all 3 of us decided to go back to the woods to explore the house. We spent a good 4 to 6 hours combing those woods but could not find that house or the rows of pine trees again. They weren't just missing. There was no trace that the house or trees were ever even there. To this day, all 3 of us get the heebiest of jeebies when we recall that summer and the mysterious house in the woods. The Gadianton Canyon incident. 4 girls, returning from a Utah rodeo in May of 1972, were plucked from this universe and thrust into a world of bizarre terror. Their misadventure began as the foursome motored down Utah Highway 56 on a dark, moonless night, and they approached the Modena Railroad crossing landmark. The girls' names, according to the editor of UFO Roundup, have been changed to protect their identities. A bit more investigation, however, uncovered the fact that 2 of the girls were sisters and a 3rd girl was a first cousin. The 4th girl was a friend of one of the sisters. Since their real names were not used, no names will be used in this description of the high strangeness that follows. Their auto, described as a 1971 Chevrolet Nova, was owned by the father of the 2 sisters. They were given permission to use the car to attend a popular rodeo held annually near Pioche, Nevada, about 180 miles northeast of Las Vegas. At approximately 10 p.m., as the 4, all students at Southern Utah University, drove back to their dorm, they approached the foreboding region where Gadianton Canyon waited. Legends claimed that beyond the canyon was a doorway to another world, an evil dimension of horror and madness that the early Utah settlers avoided at all costs. Through the years, it was said, many wagon trains carrying passengers and cargo became lost in the twisting labyrinth of that horrible place, and anything, or anyone, that entered its hellish portal was lost forever, never to be seen again. Some claimed robbers waylaid unwary travelers, others swore the spirits of the damned roamed the Nevada line during the darkness of night. The Book of Mormon taught the faithful that the area was haunted by the Nephites and Lamanites, terrorist criminals whose legions grew from before the days that Christ walked upon earth. Or so the legends and the Book of Mormon claim. As the girls approached the Union Pacific rail line, the headlights of their car lit up a sharp fork ahead. The road leading off Highway 56 looked inviting. It seemed to be a more direct route back to their dorm. Their landlady, a stickler on curfews, always locked the doors by midnight, and it was already 10:30. None of the girls relished the thought of arriving late and being forced to sleep in the car. The opportunity to take what seemed like a shortcut strongly appealed to them. The mysterious road curved sharply away from the main road in the direction of the ominous Gadianton Canyon in the distance. Despite the stories of the canyon, the girls decided to take the road. They chatted happily about the day's events as the car wound its way deeper into the foreboding canyon. As they drove, The dark rock walls inched ever closer to the crumbling edge of the thin ribbon of asphalt. Somewhere along the way, the road changed from asphalt pavement to cracked concrete. Abruptly, one of the girls shrieked, "Look out!" The road suddenly ended at a towering rock wall. They were boxed in by the canyon and had no choice but to turn around and go back the way they'd come. The three girls moaned and complained to the driver. Now they'd all have to sleep in the car. They'd never make it back to the dorm in time because the shortcut cost them at least a wasted half-hour of driving. As they wound their way back towards Highway 56, they left the walls of the oppressive canyon behind them and emerged into the countryside again. Several minutes passed before they noticed the landscape had dramatically changed. What was desolate, windswept desert sand, dotted with dry sagebrush, stubby ocotillo, and gnarled Spanish bayonet, was now lush fields of ripening wheat under a clear, moonlit sky. In the distance, the water of a large lake shimmered silvery under a bright moon. Yet the moon should not have been visible that night. Later, they recalled that, at that moment, they felt they'd been driven into a different world. The events that followed proved them right. As they continued onwards, they marveled at tall stands of ponderosa pine where no such trees should have existed in the desert. Suddenly, a bright light off the roadway ahead captured their attention. Now the girls were on edge. They had no idea where they were, and wherever it was, it didn't look like either Utah or Nevada. Maybe someone could help point them in the right direction so they could get back onto Highway 56 and finally reach their dorm. Approaching the light ahead of them, they discovered it came from a large building, some kind of roadhouse or restaurant. The place sat in the middle of a large parking lot, and a blazing neon sign on the roof spelled out a message. At least that's what the girls assumed the sign was for because they couldn't read it. The sign's brilliantly glowing symbols were composed of strangely twisted lines, creating a mosaic of weird curves, a written language unknown to any of them. Without warning, very tall people burst from the roadhouse. Quite a number poured through the front door, spilling into the parking lot. Some of the roadhouse people seemed upset by the girls' arrival. They waved their arms at the girls. Others shouted and pointed at the girls and Nova. Later, the girls recalled that the people from the roadhouse seemed shocked and frightened at the appearance of the Chevrolet driving into the parking lot. As the girls pulled into the lot, one of them in the back seat got a good look at the throng of people milling outside the building. The girl who got the first good look at the growing crowd let out a blood-curdling scream. "What? Get out of here!" the girl screamed. "Punch it!" And then the other girl in the back seat caught a chilling glimpse of the people moving towards them, and she got a good look at their faces. "Step on it!" she yelled too, her voice shaking with fear. Burning rubber, the Nova fishtailed away from the strange roadhouse. Now the girls in the rear seat sobbed in terror. Haltingly, they explained to the girls in the front seat why they'd screamed. The things they saw back at the roadhouse at first looked like people. But when they got a better look at what was approaching them, it was clear that things weren't human. Wherever the four girls were, they were nowhere near Modena, nowhere near any place they'd ever heard of on Earth. Then their horror intensified. As they raced through the forbidding night on a strange road, passing the strange lake, intense lights lit up their car from behind. The girls in the back saw the lights, and at the same time, the driver saw them in her rearview mirror. "Oh, my God! They're coming after us. Go faster! Faster!" Four freakish, egg-shaped vehicles, humming and whining loudly, closed in on the speeding Nova. Each small vehicle had one large headlight and two front wheels. From what the girls could see, the vehicles had only one rear wheel. "Go faster! They're gaining on us!" one of the girls in the rear shrieked. The Nova's engine roared as its speed crept towards 80 miles per hour. Still, the crazy egg-shaped cars pursued them. Then the girls were back in the canyon. The Nova's roaring engine reverberated off the sheer rock walls. A rooster tail of dust rose up behind them, and soon none of the girls could spot the whirring egg-shaped things anymore. As they flew out of the canyon and into the desert, the road before them all but disappeared. The car bucked crazily over sagebrush and sand. Although it quickly slowed, the Nova skidded out of control, sliding into an arroyo and crashing into the bottom. The engine died. Although badly shaken, none of the girls were seriously hurt. The car, however, was undrivable. 3 of the tires were flat. After sleeping in the car until sunrise, they walked towards Highway 56, several miles away. Finally, tired, hungry, and still terribly frightened by their unworldly experience, they spotted a Utah Highway Patrol car and waved it over. The trooper listened to their story. The official report to the Utah Highway Patrol. The details of the report to the Utah Highway Patrol have been muddied over the years. Most versions of the incident list the trooper at the scene as Vic Lundquist. But the officer was not a man, as many assumed, nor was the trooper's name Lundquist. I drove through a town stuck in the past. Okay, so this happened in April of this year. My mom and I were on a road trip in another state, driving on a state highway north of the major interstate, probably 60 or so miles. We wanted a better experience than typical highway driving, so it was a great scenic route. We were driving through vast swaths of farmland and small ag communities spread out every 45 to 60 minutes of driving. So we're out there, if you will, hours away from the nearest big city. It was absolutely beautiful, by the way. I was a passenger, just enjoying the scenery. About 3/4 of the way to our destination, the speed dropped to 25, and the road took a hard blind left turn into a very small town. Unlike the other ag towns where you see them on the approach, slow down, and drive through them, this one came up abruptly, and it kind of felt like the highway just dumped us into this town. It was very, very tiny, maybe 3 blocks total, and we were out. But what we saw was crazy. 50s themed diner, an old gas station with traditional pumps, a Wild West themed general store, and the craziest part, there were a handful of classic cars from the 40s and 50s that all appeared to be in great condition. It looked like they were just parked, there weren't any car shows or people walking around viewing them. My mom wanted to stop and get some coffee, but something in my gut was off, and I said, "Hell no, this place is freaky." She then made the comment that it felt like the place was right out of the 50s, and they've kept the theme going. To me, it was giving major sundown town vibes, or something. I couldn't place a finger on it, something was weird. It took all of 25 seconds to drive through and get back to a faster speed limit, and we were off. We wrapped up the vacation a few days later, and that was that. I've recalled that experience quite a few times these past few months, and finally, last night, I wanted to look into this place. I traced our route on maps, and after searching for quite a bit, I eventually found it and checked it out on Street View. Much to my surprise, the Street View looked nothing like my memory. The general store was different, the diner was different, and the damn gas station with the cool retro pumps? Gone. In its place stood a RV storage with a few tiny campers. The image date was from after our trip. It was perfect, they changed it. No issue, I clicked on the picture from 2022 before our trip. Much to my utter horror, the only thing different in the older image were the campers. I asked my mom about it today, and she explained the town exactly as I remember it, then also brought up how I made a comment about feeling uneasy and how she wished we stopped anyway. Well, I showed her the Street View images, and she got freaked out too. And yes, the town on maps is the same one we drove through. There aren't any other places on that road that cut hard left. I'm 100% certain, and my mom was able to zoom in and eventually find it herself. Yes, I literally asked her to do that for my own sanity, because this is freaky. I've been looking through others' experiences but can't find anything similar to this. Has anyone heard or experienced anything like it firsthand?